I'm Ken Schmaltz from Rugby, North Dakota. My dad, Blaine Schmaltz, and 24 years old, and excited to be here and excited to share what we have done and what we have, been able to do on our farm in Rugby.
My name is Blaine Schmaltz. I'm from Rugby, North Dakota. I'm going to talk about regenerative agriculture, just like everyone else here probably today is, on soil building and health. I've been doing it for some 20 plus years, at least that I call the start of when I discovered that there needed to be a big change on our farm. Well, I would say the number one thing is to learn how to be observant and really see what you're looking at. And sort of examples like I watch the weed profile that may occur in my production system, and that weed will tell me what my deficiency might be in the soil. And it will also tell me what I need to do on the fertility levels, because the weeds do answer your questions. Soil building starts by a lot of different means. When I say it sort of becomes a spiritual path, because you need to connect with your land in order to, your land will tell you what it needs if you're observant. Well, greetings everyone. Well, we are getting a little mic feedback here.
You gotta get away from me more.
Okay. I'm Blaine Schmaltz, as he said, from Rugby, North Dakota. This is my son Kent, and I'm more than honored today to be invited in to speak and share some of the things that I have learned from this Burleigh County group that has actually led to some success on our farm. My son Kent has done the presentation because I wanted you to see it through his eyes. Chris gives me the permission to give the swear O in the organic world, because anyone that knows me here in this audience knows that I've been practicing organic practices for well over 20 years now. And I will tell you that if it wouldn't have been for this Burleigh County soil group, I wouldn't have been able to go to places that I needed to go to, because I had been doing organic production for 6 to 8 years prior to meeting any of them. And I couldn't, we were doing cover cropping because it was part of our rotation that was required of us to do certification. I was companion cropping when I didn't understand it, because I knew that if I took oats and peas together, that they were companion crops that would help enhance the soil health together and provide the nutrition for them. So we kind of did that by accident. But then all of a sudden, I decided on a whim to come to one of the conferences that the soil health workshop, one of the ones they had. And it was like, wow, these guys are here to help. And so I took a lot of the information from a lot of the mentors that are in here today, and I don't need to mention, there's so many of you that were all a part of that, little bits and pieces of where we went to in order to complete what we wanted to do organically. Everybody's sort of got a story, and my story about how I even started this trail of where we were going to go was that in 1993, I came back farming. It was a year before he was born. And I was doing fall herbicide application and became very sick by just cleaning out the tank. Don't remember going to town. And I spent 3 months on and off in the heart and lung clinic here in Bismarck. And luckily for a Taiwanese doctor that there happened to be there at the time, he was able to diagnose what had happened to me. And what had happened was, for a period of about 14 or 15 years, I had custom harvested throughout the country from Texas on up, started about in 1976. And they didn't use a lot of pre-harvest chemicals at that time on the wheat. And of course, we were digging in those combines all the time and getting subjected. But about the 80s showed up, and the process of doing the pre-harvest desiccation and everything all started. Well, I happen to have about 1/8 the membrane over my lung that each and every one of you do. So everything that I smell, touch, goes right directly to my heart. So it was easy for the doctor to tell me what to do. He told me He said, what do you do? I said, I farm. He said, well, go home and pack up. And I thought for a while, well, we had a nice home in Fargo we had moved away from a year prior. Pretty much sold everything, put myself in hock to the maximum to borrow for land, borrow for equipment, borrow for operating, and I was having children. And I had to go out into the hallway after the doctor had a conversation with me and tell her that I had made a mistake and that I had to find a new direction. Well, that didn't go so good because we didn't want to go back to where we came from. So we decided to pick this path that was going to lead to organic because I didn't understand where I was going to go to where all you are today about the soil health thing. And so what I really learned, it was about these regenerative practices that you talk about today and that all of us will talk about. So there's always stepping stones to everybody's story. When your back is against the wall and you don't have a return choice, you either make or break it. So I chose the path to learn everything I could. There are so many people that I got to give credit for along the way, and I will through as we do the presentation. But what I want to tell you is that in order for success to happen, and especially for those of you that are here from the college, you should be very cognizant of what is going on around you at all times environmentally. Be ready to adapt and change, and also be aware that you will probably never totally understand it fully. So when we talk about a summit we're at here today, I had to think about the word we're at the summit. No, this is a summit of knowledge, a summit of sharing, a summit of people that are inventors, they are entrepreneurs, they share, they're willing to share, and take you all to where you have to go on the journey. And so I'm going to leave you with that today. And like I said, my son put this presentation together. This is not an organic presentation per se. It just happened to be the path that I was given, and that's what I had to do. But through Kent's eyes, so he was basically born a year after I was diagnosed. He's sort of evolved with everything we've done. And I will tell you that I think there's a lot of people in the room who will tell you, they say that a farmer is born, but I beg to differ because I believe in talking with a number of you out here through time that a farmer is born in the ages of 10 to 12, and when they make that decision, they're stuck. So Kent is here, and I'm very proud with me today that I have a reason to be up here and talk to all of you. So Kent, I'll let you go ahead.
Kent, is it on? Yep. I'm Kent Schmaltz. So I'm 24, and I'm young and dumb, but I'm excited about what's going on here. So I'm just, I farm with my grandpa's 84, my dad's 60, and I'm 24, and just the knowledge we've gained from so many different age groups, different practices, is just, it's absolutely amazing, and I'm humbled to be here. I am. So, how do we do this?
There you go.
So this is 3 generations, me, my dad, my grandpa, and just like we're all trying to decide on this crop diversity, we got 3 brands of combines, and nobody has a clue which one's best yet. We're figuring it out as we go. But faith, family, and farming, I think, is what really matters in this whole deal. So diversity. What is diversity? You need diversity to make what's above ground and what's below ground to truly work in a symbiotic relationship. Diversity is key for whether you're doing grazing, whether you are growing crops, the pollinators. I mean, the mycorrhizal fungi that people talk about and everything. It's just absolutely key to this whole endeavor we're on. What is diversity? Well, I see it all parts of an ecosystem working together in a symbiotic relationship the way nature intended. Working with nature is much easier than working against it. Diversity is key. When diversity is implemented properly and custom fit to your operation, it will lead to a more efficiency, lower input costs, and profitability. What I mean by that is, no matter what you do, when you work together with nature, it just makes it easier. You know, we as farmers, we see a problem, we see a weed, oh, we better go spray that weed. You know, we see another problem and we need more fertilizer. If you work with nature, it will guide you. And I think we just need to focus on what's around us and go from there with it.
In that, I'll add to that. So what we do on our farm, and you know, a lot of you have touched on it today a little bit, is we look at each individual field that we have, and we look at the weed profile that is coming up on that, and we use that weed to tell us what our deficiency is and or what fertility that we need. There's a really good book, and some of you know what it is. It's called Weeds and Why They Grow by Jay McCammon. And a lot of us use that book because it tells you what nutrition that you're missing by watching the weed profile that will grow. So observation, like I originally started out with, this observation is so important. And sometimes you have consistently why crops grow really well on a certain piece of land that you have. You need to look at that profile of fertility of what it really is. And I agree with Jeremy that, as he said today, that, you know, what good does the soil test do? Because there's so much we can't measure in the things that we're doing. But I truly believe that you should have a starting point and a barometer for those of you that are just starting this path so that you know where you are. You should know your organic matter levels. You should know your CEC, your infiltration rates. You should know some of these basic things. And it's really good to know, in North Dakota, we have high cal soils. It's all tied up. So how are you going to release that calcium? The calcium is the mother lode of nutrient efficiency. It is not nitrogen. And so we forget that the things that we're looking for are not what you think that you need. So, and with that saying, I just, in addressing these weed populations, looking at if we need to add fertility for soil, for instance, I know by the things that I've studied and researched that if I raise an oats crop or a companion oats crop with whatever your companion might be, or buckwheat or flax, I know that those are phosphorus releasers. I know that they will take your tied up phosphorus, bring it, store it for when you need it. If you need nitrogen, you know you need to add your legume plants to that. If you need weed control, there's all kinds of plants we have that have liliopathy. Liliopathy is this natural, it's the natural resistance to eradicate weed through the root extradate. You have rye. And in my case, I use some ancient grains because I'm a seed producer. One thing that we do a lot of is we do seed. And I have done seed for a long time. And so I have to look at what I may have in my profile that may become a unwanted weed or a plant out of place, as I may say. And so I may look at, so I'm using like amaranth spelt, and that keeps the weed, populations down for a very long period of time, so I can graze like edible beans or peas, where it takes a long time for them to emerge and be competitive. So, I can't.
You know, I think with that too, you know, if you treat your soil like a bank account, I mean, if I go out on a Friday night to the bar and I spend some money, if I don't put money back in over time, I'm not going to have any money. We keep taking from the land, produce that Y word that Chris said, you know, the yield. We take from our land to produce it, but we need to, you know, add back to that land and give back so that it will provide for us and generations to come. And I think that's why we're all here, because the land is getting degraded, you know, just like Jeremy said. You know, that's huge how much soil has left in inches, you know, over these years, and we need to give back to that so we can move forward.
Why the cover crops? Well, of course, it adds diversity. There also is an interesting thing about diversity on rangeland. As I went down this path, we needed to address all the rangeland we had, and so I decided that I wasn't real comfortable with the species that were being provided on how they wanted to put range or put land back into pasture production, because I found out they just throw a bunch of multiple species together and they hope that one or two or three will prevail and become competitive and so on and so forth. Well, I happened to not like what I was observing there on that, and I went down to the ARS south of Bismarck to the USDA Center where Wayne Duckwitz works, and I said, Wayne, I says, you don't know me, but I said, here's the deal. I said, I have a bunch of farmland that is fragile and that I feel we want to implement livestock into our system, but I don't want to put the wrong species because I've studied the book and they tell you that there's a 60% success ratio or 50% or whatever it is for this grass type for that soil, and they just want to throw a bunch together. And he says, it's your lucky day. He said, I just came back from Kansas to a grass clinic, and I have all the manuals, and he said, they started something down there called sculptured seedings. I said, sculptured seedings? What's that? Well, he said, show me your soil types. So I got all the maps together, threw them on, and he seen I had 5, 6, 7, 8 soil types on a parcel of land. And he says, well, these are all of the plants and species that will be successful in that area and have an 85% efficiency ratio, be successful. And I said, well, that's what I want to do. And he says, well, you're going to have to seed all of these little parcels within your fields. Are you willing to do that? I said, absolutely. And we done that, and then we started to implement finishing grass-fed cattle, joined the grass-fed coalition down here in Bismarck, got a lot of more tools to work with, and we were taking cattle and putting 3.5 pounds a day on them. And for steers that were choicing, because we were measuring the weights all the time because we wanted to know it was working. Well, we watched the cattle, and they went around within my sections of land, and they would just graze out the things that they needed for nutrition during the day. So it maximized efficiency because that's what they wanted. They weren't just filling themselves up, they were filling themselves up with nutrition. So we went ahead and did that, and we did that for about 6, 8 years or so, and then Kent went off to college, and then he happens to be my cattleman also. So anyway, we put that in the back burner, and then I decided that we would concentrate more on the cover cropping thing and intercropping and so on and so forth. So.
And the cattle always, through all this, the cattle know best. You can't trick them. If you don't have the diversity to give a cow, they don't know they're missing it. But if you throw the diversity out there and you have these cover crops with so many different functions, that cow will go seek out that plant. I watch it over and over. Will go seek out that plant and graze certain areas. And if you just watch that, it is amazing, what you see.
So another reason that cover is important, this picture is actually taken last winter in February, and we actually go out and do some soil testing in our ground that we idle out. We want to know, get some kind of measurement on what we may have built or may have lost in the process. And we all know that there's no, you can do the Salvita test, and Midwest Labs calls it the BRAN test now, and it's a respiratory test, and it's a burst. When it's given water, it's the burst, the activity that happens. And that's sort of just a scale of, like, if I remember right, 0 to 50 or 60, and it's just a barometer, but it's still a barometer of where you're going to go. You can't put exactness to any of these tests because their functionality is really for a certain time when they're needed. So.
And just this really just explains, just some tips of, there's probably beginners in the room and there is guys that are well advanced in all this. But, if I look at a field and I'm driving around and I'm trying to decide what am I going to do with this field, I think you should first decide, what are you trying to address? Is it a salinity problem? Is it a compaction problem? Do you want, a weed suppression competition? Are you trying to convert tied up fertilizer? What are you doing? And then what does your current chemical program allow, or how are you going to accommodate for this intended cover crop? All these chemicals now, they have longevity, residuals that we don't know how fast, they put it in the guide and say, okay, this is what you have for how long this chemical lasts in the soil. I've seen where it lasts way longer, and I've seen where the soil eats it up way quicker. So I just think people need to, really look into, is this crop going to grow with my program, or am I going to have to change to adapt to it?
This journey of sort of understanding what you need to do to address your deficiencies that may be is sort of a spiritual journey. And I say that in earnest because I told you the story where I just about didn't get to do my job that I wanted to do, live my life the way I wanted to live it. And so when I was having, sort of discovering, sort of like, there was all these things thrown at us, you know, you should throw a whole bunch of species together, you know, this crop works good with this, and there's so much choice. And you go, well, what's right? What's right for this land? And when I had to make a decision, I did this. I would get up at like 4 or 5 in the morning. I would go out and I would drive to that field that I was either going to have the men decide what we were going to do that day or how I was going to carry out the job that needed to be done. And I would walk across that land. And if you guys ever want to get in touch with what you're doing and sort of what we're talking about today, put your footprints on the soil. When you do that, the decision becomes very clear. I haven't met a person yet that I have told that to that it didn't work. This connection that you have to have as a personality for the job that you're attempting to do in harmony with nature is a spiritual thing.
You know, Dad had a quote to me too. You know, in this, you could spend yourself to death on cover crop. You could, you know, try to stick all the money into it to fix the land, but you know, I think we got to realize you got to be a land keeper to be a steward of the land and to fix the land. So you know, just keep that in mind when you're making all these plans. Cover crop tips continued. Keep something green and growing at all times. I think that's the goal that we're all having here is extend that growing season. You know, we've seen where our cover crops are growing underneath the snow. I mean, it's unbelievable. Dad and I were out in a field, which I think it was turnip, radish, emmer, and there's a few others in there. But we went out and dug that snow away, and it was bright green. I mean, it was absolutely living underneath the snow. We took a spade, I think it was February, and we were able to put the spade in the ground in the middle of the winter. So tell me that doesn't keep the soil alive longer to feed all this, you know, diversity under the soil. You know, utilizing favorable plants to lower the amount of unfavorable. You know, you can do, I think, just as good of a job with weed suppression as, you know, tillage probably used to do by just using cover crops that are like a rye that's allelopathic, or, you know, buckwheat that just absolutely suppresses different things. You know, alfalfas. Diversity is key. So
I had the pleasure at one time I used to fly quite a bit, and because of having the harvest business down in Kansas and Colorado and so on and so forth, on occasion I would fly to a location, and there was this is before I even knew we had to address this soil health thing. I flew over a field in Colorado, and I seen that there was snow laying on these pivots, on every one of these pivots. Or I seen that they were black, and then that I seen that all of a sudden there was all this snow, and then there was this field that had stubble on it, and everything was gone. The water had went down and everything. So I asked him, the guy that was flying with me, I said, can we land here a little bit? It was close enough to the airport. I said, can I go find out who that was? And I made the phone call to him, and he was a fella that about 30 years ago was addressing soil biologies. And so that was my first introduction to know when you're in the sky that you can see where you have healthy living soils. It's incredible. You just take a flight over your farm in the wintertime, you learn a lot.
So what do we see in our future? You know, we do a lot of cropping, and yes, there's a lot of livestock below the ground, but I think what's above the ground is just as important, you know, and that's livestock of any sort. You know, like Gabe does, I mean, 12 different critters or whatever it is. I mean, you got to have diversity. But what I've seen from this, you know, we did a full season. Now, on this particular field, we had a crop failure, a wipeout. So I thought, well, let's turn lemons into lemonade, I guess. Let's seed a full season cover crop. So we did, and we seeded that full season cover crop. And the next year, what we achieved for a corn crop with minimal to no inputs was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, yes, it's great to get this stuff green and growing after your harvest, but I don't think the window is long enough. I think in a rotation, just like you have corn, beans, wheat, barley, whatever it is, we need to have really a year where it is full season diversity, and I think this would take care of a lot of disease issues, a lot of problems that we have, that there's a reason we're having those problems.
Some of your best learning tools are things that go wrong. For instance, a hailstorm. Maybe an infestation of something that decimated your crop. Can be all kinds of things. And you will learn that putting back those things that you were going to take from it, you get it replaced almost double the next year and makes up for it. We have found out so many times in sort of the hard way that if something goes wrong and we end up, we have a loss on a crop and it happens to be idled out and then we put a cover crop in, we get twice the yields, sorry, I got to use the yield word, but we get twice the yields that we would have had we grown that first crop. So some of those things, things that we're going to change in our farm after all this time is actually going out to a full idle out year. We have learned that it's just much more the economy of it and how beneficial it is, and it lasts a long time. It sort of goes back to, if any of you ever broke up an alfalfa field, how come you can go back to that field 8 to 10 years later and you could still pick that field out? You know, the lignin that got put down in that ground and that provided fertility for the future, you can't replace.
Now this one, we're going to move through these next slides a little faster, but this next one, this was that year that we had a failure. On part of the field I did the corn, and part of the field I decided to do durum. But we seeded this durum in after a full season cover crop, and that field was clean. I mean, I did not spray it. I mean, no chemical, no fungicide. We did use a comb cut that we use to take out the thistle out of it, but what we see after these lull years, or we want to call it an idle year, is unbelievable.
I'll talk a little bit later. I think he has a slide a little later about the comb cut. It's a weeding tool that was invented in Sweden that is sort of coming into evolution here. We've had it for a couple of years right now. And one thing that sort of comes into mind is the strong emphasis on this Palmer amaranth and the eradication of it. Well, because it's from the pigweed plant, this particular tool works on anything with a solid or a hollow stem. And it'll eradicate it when your crop, your cereal crop is less than fifth leaf. So you can go right down the crop, doesn't cut the crop out. I think we have some pictures that are coming up.
Well, I'd like to say I planned this green seeding. I did not. I seeded rye and planned on that was going to be the crop. And just like he said, as you go around and look at these fields, I decided probably not going to be the best rye crop. So what the heck? Let's give it a try, because I'm young and dumb, like I said. So let's give her a go and let's try seeding chickpeas into fall rye. And what I saw was pretty amazing. I mean, if anybody grows chickpeas, there's not many things you can spray for broadleaf control on chickpeas. There's really nothing. I mean, other than your pre's. I mean, you can do some grass, a select or a sure two or whatever you want to use, but there's not many options for that. So I think for you chickpea producers, it is a good option.
The one thing I'll say, if that practice would have been done on the organic side of the production, we use a clipper at Anthesis, and it's a regular CRP clipper, and we clip it off, and it does basically the same thing. The one thing that we don't have is the, I'm looking for the word for the effect, if you were to desiccate rye in that plant, you sort of go through a stage where the alcohol is returned to the soil, and you get this it's a difficult time for the plant to grow through that stage. We don't have that when we do the clipping, but you do have a little bit of moisture respiration, transpiration that exists when you clip it off. So,
and this one, I want to explain what I meant by that. I mean, I don't think that chickpeas are a bad crop. You know, I don't see chickpeas as a monocrop cash crop on our farm. I find this exciting. This was those days that you don't communicate always very well. Dad was running the planter and I was running the air seeder. Well, we're seeding crop, we're having fun. So I swung in and seeded the chickpeas, and Dad came in to seed the corn, or vice versa. And
came in to seed the corn, I went right over his chickpeas.
And I did not have that great of a crop of chickpeas at all. I'm not gonna lie to you. The crop was pretty bad monocropped in that area, but the corn and the chickpeas, where they were together, was twice as good. It was one of them kind of aha moments. That's well, maybe this.
Somebody used the phrase earlier, like, duh, this happened to us, look at that.
I just got to decide how to combine the chickpeas between the corn, but we'll figure that out later. This is another one of those combo crops I tried this year. Emmer was the main crop for a cash crop, and this particular field has a pretty bad clay pan, so I decided to do some diversity, you know, in that for compaction. And then I wanted to see if the benefits of the lentils for weed suppression and for some nitrogen building. And this particular one, we also did not spray or anything.
That happens to be an organic field, that one.
So, harvest. This is harvest on that field that I did the mix on. Can't say enough good about a stripper header. You know, I think Dwayne Beck won't argue with me at all on that one. A stripper header is important, right, Dwayne?
We made the trip down in the hot of a summer day one time to see the stripper header in action. I had been around it a bit. It had just sort of come into evolution during my harvest years, but not many people had them. And nobody was using them. Now they all use them out in the high dry plains. But we went down to see what Dwayne was doing, and down there right away we had made up our mind that this is what we were going to do no matter what. So
this next one, well, that just looks good, doesn't it? I mean, these cattle out grazing, you know, on this particular field, we were learning to set our combine, learning to use the stripper header. You know, we shot some out the back, but, you know, maybe a case combine does that, I don't know. But who knows?
We actually had some fun experiences with the stripper header because it sort of has a way of eliminating, depending on the speed you run the rotor and so on and so forth, you can actually put down a wonderful cover crop while you're doing that. And not that they're all good seeds. So me being a seed grower, the wind is set real high on combines to get rid of the seeds that no one will buy from me. And so why won't I save energy and put them where they belong, back out on the land? And most of the time, the inferior seed, if I planted next to it with the best of my seed lot, I don't think I could replicate how good that seed actually is. And how does that work? I don't know. I'm a seedsman. I'm supposed to provide the best of the seed there is out of that lot, but I don't think I'm doing that.
And this particular field, this was Dad's field, and I wanted some, you know, grazing for my cattle, so I figured, you know, we could use Lexion, but that was probably broke down that day. So, you know, I figured I'd shoot a little off the back of the cattle. What the heck? So this was the field, you know, that was intercropped, the lentils, the kale, the turnips. This is after harvest, I believe, about a month after. There was hardly anything growing in there. It just was, I mean, very minimal when we combined. As soon as it got sunlight, boom, my cover crop was there taking off. I didn't have to seed. I seeded it with an 1895 drill, and I seeded it all one pass in the spring, and this is what happened after harvest. So
I kept track of the rainfall from March 1st. It included a little bit of snow the last shot. We never got that last snowfall that all of you had down here. We had pretty much open winter till Labor Day, and it equaled just shy 4.95 inches of rain. And so we felt very fortunate. It all came in June. Cereal crops were really great, but it made difficulty when going forward to harvest those cereal crops. When we started to plant cover crops in them, we actually could not, where they were naturally seeded out of the back of that combine and or head, those crops grew. Where we planted them, they did not. And that's an interesting thought process. I know I've seen this in the past, but I can't wait for the day. There's some inventors in this room. I know there is, because everybody gets pretty creative doing this stuff. We really need to put that cover crop seeder on that header of that combine. I mean, if you choose that you want to put some diversity down, because when the straw is cut off, no matter how you do, whether you strip it or cut it off, it has this transpiration time period where a certain amount of water, and Dwayne probably knows how much that is, that comes out of that plant after if you cut it off and so on and so forth. And that moisture, that first 24 hours after you harvest it, is the best moisture you can have. And so someone asked me when they asked me, well, how do you do your cover crop? How do you get it to grow like that or do that? I says, you see that truck that's getting took out of the field? You see the air drill coming right in behind it? I said, that's when we plant our cover crop. The minute that combine doesn't even darken that doorstep, and that drill's there on that land. Well, you know, this year, we were even earlier than normal, but we actually had a 30-day lull where we couldn't get anything to germinate, that was a rarity. So just when you think you have it all figured out and everything's worked for a decade, and in 1 year it won't work, so.
This is yours.
Yeah, so these are my alternative tools. So that's a comb cut, the one on with the John Deere tractor there. And it's not a really good picture, but it's made in Sweden. You can go on YouTube and see how it runs and everything. But it actually goes in the cereal crop, and you can go as early as you want, whenever you can cut it off. But you should probably cut like a thistle off at bud stage and so on and so forth, so you don't get it to regenerate back. So we do most of our weeding, and I will tell you, and I think my neighbors will tell you that you can't tell me from any of the conventional farmers. In fact, most of the time it's better because I don't have resistant weeds out there. So anyway, that's one of the tools. The other one there is the clipper that I told you. That is me clipping some rye and thesis, and that's over a bean crop. And so we just let it lay down in there, just clip it. That happens to be, I have a 3-point mount one, and that's front mount. There was actually a manufacturer at one time that made all them for the CRP weed clipping that the government paid them to do at one time for weed control. So we have a few little tools we use, and so we sort of know some alternative methods on this weed control thing. This is also another thing. So when I plant organic edible beans, right now I am going in and undercutting with a hay buster sweep plow, the rye, and I'm going to come and no-till my pinto beans in there. And I think the next slide, you'll see the weeds, there's some weeds in there that come up. That's what my pinto beans look like. The whole field looks that way. You have to have a certain amount of biomass that's there. When Rodale has done the research out at my farm, they say it's somewhere around 6,000 pounds per acre. And if we get to 4, it's marginal on how that works. So, but yeah, we raise edible beans. We have trouble later on in the season when the weeds decide, when they get enough sunlight, and we have huge decomposition biologically with them. I mean, Christy, I sat down with her probably some 15 years ago, and we talked about the mycorrhizal thing, and I colonized my farm with certain species in a very, very, very initial stages. And we do add some trichoderma, and we're really careful because there's sort of the happy hippie when it comes to eating up things in the soil. So anyway, that's even a little. So that is just that's really late in the stage of game. Absolutely the same spot in the field to where right now they're just in 10% bloom. So they're setting seed. Yeah, that's your.
On this one, this is where we'd like, and I don't know if Dad wants to touch on, we do seed. So a lot of the time, our hands are tied a little bit with what we get to try for intercrops and what we get to really do. So this seems like a good fit for us too, is the Durham with a pinto, just for the timing difference, and we'll probably give that a go. Well, this one here, Yeah, sometimes the tillage tools end up in the trees, and I think that's a good deal. Row crop cultivators, were a pretty big part on our farm, especially in the organic, and now you see us parking them on a cement slab, and that leads up to that, always be ready to adapt and change your practices. So what did we do with the toolbar? Well, we got bored in the summer and we started building. Could have went to the fair, I suppose, but we didn't. So this one, we took a Hinneker row crop cultivator toolbar and mounted, I believe it was Intercedar was the company. And
Out of Pennsylvania.
I had some John Deere manifolds laying around that I, figured might blow out, so I'll throw it on here. But this one, our plan is to be able to interseed in row crops on corn. These are paired row. I think they're about 5-inch apart.
There's 7.
And I believe, our goal with that is lesser maturity, but we'll still be able to fill in that row for weed competition, and we'll be able to do, and maybe we want to do some fish foliar, fertilizer with it, or side row banding, or I want to do paired row, wheat with soybeans on 30-inch. I mean, a lot of these guys have built that are a little fancier.
So I know some of you, have discussed about you just need maybe one row down in between there. But me being a seedsman, I would like to have one of those rows be my small seeded seeds in the blend, even if I did up to 20-some species, and the large seeded going down the other row, because I can actually set that depth a little bit more for the larger seeded ones. And I can also meter them out pretty accurately. Me being a seedsman, I'm very cognizant of the cost of doing things. So that would be the reason that we would actually use 2 in the paired row also. Important about a lot of these things you do is that when it comes time that you need to turn things into a cash crop, all of these fun things you did, you may have intermixtures that are not acceptable for marketing, or you want to separate them for one reason or another. We pre-screen and separate in our intermixed crops, our intercropped crops, right away before they go into the bins. So one part of the screen is taking out one size of product and the other's taking out the other size. In a simple thing that I can tell you is if you had peas and oats or peas and barley together, or even a 3-way, you can actually separate that to 100% on the first pass go around. It's really simple to do. Canola is easy to take out of, companion crops. So the milling part of it becomes sort of your value add for all of the hard work you did if you've taken it to the cash crop level. So.
And this, I kind of already touched on it. This is right behind the combine. We had the air seeder going, and this year, unfortunately, the whole year, I think we had 8 inches at my down by my
finally
7 by yours.
When Labor Day hit, since Labor Day, we've had an additional 3 inches.
And it got cold on us, and the cover crop didn't grow, and we were, I was just kind of hanging my head on the whole deal, and that's why I just am so much more positive on, especially a full season cover crop, just for what I've seen. By accident and what I've seen, how much you're going to spend the same on this cover crop seed. Get the life out of it. It's just makes more sense to me.
We're strongly convinced that idle out year, when you take that idle out year, we're getting enough return back that second year and the third year after it to replace the income that might have been lost. We've done it too many times, and we just shake our heads and we go, why don't we do the whole farm that way? And unfortunately, back in the day when they used to have half fallow, but they made it black, they sort of were in their own way conserving nature or conserving water, they thought. But they were really building up nitrogen by every operation they were doing. There's sort of, the research is that there was 10 to 15 pounds of N every time you ran the tillage tool through. But like Christy said, your ground's disappearing below you. They were taking away for all those years. So we have 30 or 40 or maybe 50 years of time where that horizon has disappeared, even though it appears you have topsoil. And that was well presented.
You know, and I have a farm that I call my problem child, and it's a lot of saline, and every year we'd get, you know, kochia would come up and this and that, and we'd go in, and I thought, oh, when I start farming, I'm gonna fix it with tillage. So I'd go out there with the quick till or cultivator or whatever, and I'd till it, and it went worse, and I'd till it, and it got worse, and Dad finally said to me one year, and sometimes I listen, but told me, well, just don't touch it, don't bother it. And I did that. I'm just, you know, I kind of used kochia, it just grows anyways, and I let it grow, but we mowed it a few times, and that mowing, for whatever reason, and letting it grow and suck up that salt, it got a lot better. We actually got a corn crop off it the following year after just leaving it, but then I think I went and tilled it again.
But there's again about recognizing your weeds. You know, the kochia plant, of course, everybody sees it on saline areas, sodic areas. They, you know, it's really, it's because you have those high salt areas, but actually, it's actually trying to recycle your calcium that you have in your soil too. Kochia actually does that too. Highest protein feed you could ever use if you ever green chopped it.
Take it at the right time. Maybe we should all grow kochia.
Okay, so we are also, I didn't really preface that correctly about, we had a bunch of grazing land that was fragile land that we put into pasture grazing systems. And through time, we have sandy, very dry, sandy soils. The moles and the pocket gophers have just made it unbearable to drive a four-wheeler across it. God forbid you have to take a tractor across it. And so we've started to take some of those soils out to renew them, even though they were in these sculptured seedings and so on and so forth. So I'm actually taking out pasture land, farmland that was converted to pasture land. It's probably been in pasture now for 8-9 years. And we took that out. I did that with the undercutter, I think is the next slide. I have the undercutter. And then, Yep. So there I am with the undercutter actually taking out, instead of the alternative method would be to, I suppose, glyphosate or however.
You couldn't even tell we were in that field, but a week, you know, even week to 2 weeks later, the alfalfa was pretty much.
And so I got the crown roots and everything, and we come in with the no-till drill and seeded cover crop. I put a huge diverse species mixture, because when you upset a system and you take away all of the food for the biology that has learned to exist there, you have to replace that, because all of a sudden they have no food and they go dormant, die. I mean, they just go away. So you have to rebuild a new colonization of species. So,
you know, on this one, you know, Jay said to me the other night, he said, if we're not having fun, what's this all about? And Jay, I believe that, I mean, completely. And, you know, Jay kind of got me interested in a lot of this when, you know, Burleigh County once again used to fill a room like this. I was in the back in a little cowboy hat, and I was just absorbing all of it. And Jay would always chat with me once in a while and got me fired up on this. And just like our faith family farming, you know, this is what it's all about. You know, this is I think what our main goal is.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.